Your Welcome is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Now, most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening to me talk, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you could be doing right now, which is getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy. You can save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles in your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company affiliates, national annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations. Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. This is our 4th attempt, which makes this episode a bit of a mistrial, with Robert Barnes, one of my favorite people, returning guest. Robert was on the show last year to break down the Kyle Rittenhouse case, which I had not been familiar with up until that point. I was making a point not to follow the news, and he broke it down brilliantly. And since there were some news stories in the news, to be redundant, involving the legal profession, I'm like, you know what? Rather than sitting at here looking at Twitter and having every Tom, Dick, and Harry think that they have a JD and explain the situation to me, let me ask an actual practicing attorney who's been involved in several of these cases to give me his professional opinion. Robert, thank you so much for coming back to the show.
Yeah, glad to be here.
The first thing I want to discuss was, and you know, there's a lot of minutia here, was the raid by the FBI on Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago. Now, here is the narrative that has been propounded by corporate media outlets as far as I could ascertain, which was this. President Trump was in possession of some documents he did not have a right to, both because it was not his property. Simply because you're the White House resident does not mean that everything in the White House belongs to you. No one disputes that. President Clinton and Hillary Clinton had to return tens of thousands worth of things when they left the White House in 2001. This was executed in standard operating procedure. Trump is just trying to make himself out to be a victim, whereas if he just handed over the documents that was never his to begin with, none of this would have happened. And he's just making the FBI look bad when they're just following orders, doing their job. And the person who approved the warrant and the head of the FBI were both appointed by him. So who is he to have a right to complain? So what's wrong with that kind of narrative?
That there is no standard operating procedure when it comes to raiding a former president of the United States.
Okay,
and that there is no standard operating procedure for raiding the political opponent, the leading presidential opponent of the incumbent party. So both of these are extraordinary, exceptional, ahistorical events in American legal history. And the fact that even as a analyst at CNN said, if they did this just over some documents at the archives, this doesn't look good. And that's because that appears to be the pretext. We don't know for sure because we haven't seen the actual warrant. Judicial Watch and others have brought suit to try to unseal the warrant so we can find out what's there.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
If the warrant is this much in the public interest, is it unusual that the warrant, as we record, has not been made public yet?
That's not unusual.
Okay.
It's up to now. My understanding is the president's legal team ultimately did receive a copy of the warrant. There's been inconsistent information about that, but the report I saw did, in fact, Christina Bobb, I think was the attorney at the scene, did in fact receive a copy of the warrant, but only belatedly in the process. Okay. There is a constitutional requirement of the warrant of what's called presentment, which means if the warrant isn't presented at the time of the search activity, then that can be considered a violation of the Fourth Amendment just because they didn't properly present it. Apparently, there is an issue here with whether they timely and properly presented it. It also appears they attempted to turn off cameras so that nobody could see what they were doing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It appears they were unsuccessful because it appears Trump still had cameras rolling. And according to reports from Eric Trump, his son, they have video evidence of the FBI doing things they were not legally authorized to do at the scene. The president himself has voiced the concern that they might have tried to plant evidence when they were there.
Right.
So, and that's another completely historical, ahistorical, unparalleled event. We've never had a president of the United States and a future potential president of the United States say, by the way, the leading law enforcement agency in the United States may be trying to plant evidence against me to take me out from running for president.
And let's take off Trump's tinfoil hat for a second. For a couple of years, there was an enormous investigation into President Trump and his alleged collusion with Putin. Not just that Putin would prefer Trump, meaning the claim was, well, a very different one, that his campaign was working hand in glove with Putin and his agents in Russia to bring down Hillary Clinton. At the basis of this was the infamous Steele dossier, and there was supposedly this videotape that Putin had, which was compromat or blackmail on Trump, where Trump had paid a group of prostitutes, I don't know how many supposed prostitutes there were, to urinate on a bed that because President Obama had slept in that bed, and this was the basis. But none of this turned out to be factual. But for him to say they're going to make up stories about me, it has already happened. And another example, which is, this is not in a legal context. I forget who it was. They had a tweet where they had a section from Michael Wolff's upcoming book, Fire and Fury. And in this satirical section, they were talking about how there's something called the Guerrilla Channel, and the White House staff makes up guerrilla videos and puts it on TV, and President Trump watches it and talks back to the guerrillas. And so many people tripping on themselves laughing that what a moron he is, where the morons were them, because at the very least, Trump, being on The Apprentice, knows how television works. I mean, you could call him dumb, but that's the one thing he does know, for heaven's sake. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt, go ahead.
No, exactly. And it appears Trump may have set up the FBI in this respect. So there is a law called the Presidential Records Act. It governs certain documents that are the president's documents and the government's documents. So sometimes there's overlap between the two. The president can declassify anything he wants, anytime he wants. There's no obligation he publish what he's declassified or not. There's no specific legal procedure that's required under the law, which means the president can take pretty much any document he wants.
Oh,
with
wow.
him.
Okay.
Now, there's an obligation at some point to share certain documents with the National Archives, to have a preserved copy in the National Archives of certain documents. And pretty much every president since Nixon has had disputes with the National Archives when they've left about which documents go to the archives, which documents stay with them. Even when they go to the archives, they ultimately come back to the president. They just have an additional copy, or sometimes the original is kept at the archives.
Let me ask quickly, maybe this is a stupid question, but I just want to clarify. Am I correct that every president has the highest level of classification clearance? There's no scenario where a president does not have something that like the CIA can see?
Absolutely. And in fact,
Okay.
if he orders it declassified, it's declassified.
Okay.
So what the president says goes when it comes to classification.
Okay.
That's why all of the claims about this case that they would do something they've never done in history, raid a former president, raid the leading presidential opponent of the existing presidential party, that they would do this for the National Archives. It doesn't hold water to me, but that's the official narrative. Hey, this is the National Archives. There's a DC grand jury. They'd issued a subpoena for these records. Trump had taken them on a tour. And this is where I think, going back to what you're talking about, not only the risk of fake information about Trump from the FBI and elsewhere, given their history, but also their belief that Trump is dumb. Trump apparently took him on a whole tour of Mar-a-Lago, showed him, this is where I keep these documents. This is where I keep these documents. Oh, and that's my very important safe where I keep a lot of secret documents. So they go in and they raid. They're there for like 12 hours. They're apparently not
12 hours?
Yeah, that's according to the published report. 12 hours, 30 agents ransacking. I mean, they even went into Melania's closet,
right?
Going through her clothes and everything else, like it was a J. Edgar Hoover, panty sniffing parade, that kind of thing. So they're doing all that. They bring in a safe crack. So clearly they haven't found whatever it is they're really looking for. So they bring in a safe cracker to break open Trump's safe that apparently he had told them that's where he keeps the real important stuff. They get it. They open up.
I gotta stop. Hold on. There's two scenarios here, and both are crazy. But when you're dealing with Trump, it's like, okay, which version of crazy is it? One is that he's setting them up, right? And he's like, oh, yeah, I definitely don't want you looking in this box. The other scenario, which if we take it as at face value, is that President Trump has to explain to the authorities what a safe is used for.
Yeah, exactly. Either one is embarrassing for the FBI.
Right.
But so Trump's doing the whole tour. So they go in there. They finally crack open the safe. Trump even talks about this. He goes, "Oh my goodness, they even cracked open my safe." He doesn't tell people what comes out later. There's nothing in the safe. It's like Geraldo Rivera and Al Capone. The safe is completely empty. And when I heard the safe was
literally empty?
Literally empty. There's nothing in there. Not only are there no documents in there, there's nothing in there. They paid to have this safe cracker spend an hour breaking open Trump's safe with all the super secret documents, and it's completely empty.
I would have hoped there was at least one of those like pies on a spring.
Yeah, exactly. Or, there's people that are putting all kinds of memes in there. Yeah, there's memes of, Trump doing like this.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So but that told me, okay, Trump did foresee this coming.
Yes.
My belief is there was a bunch of stuff Trump didn't declassify at the end, at least not officially. In fact, what he apparently did is he went around to all the agencies and said, what should I really not declassify? That people are talking about it. So the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, Justice Department, State Department, they all came up with their list. I suspect that Trump was like, so this is what they're most scared of.
Right.
Decided to take some of it with him.
Okay.
Particularly information that might be, and may have declassified it, but just not formally or didn't publish the fact he had declassified it.
But if you're not publishing it, how is it that you're changing the status?
So you're changing the status legally for yourself. But you're not changing it for the purposes of other people because haven't published the fact that it's declassified.
Okay.
And so and basically is insurance against future risk of indictment, assassination, or anything else. He has a bunch of files that the high ranking, whether you call it the deep state, the national security state, the administrative state, whatever language you want to utilize, people with a lot of power who had secrets in those documents that he wanted independent documentary proof of. And this is the most logical explanation for what this raid is all about.
Yes.
And that they're enraged and they think he's an idiot. So they believed him when he said, hey, if you ever need these, they're over here. I hide them in Melania's underwear garment. And then I put them over here in the safe. Because they have this caricature of Trump. Right. There's a reason the guy got into the White House. That's what I tell people is like, you can think whatever you want about the guy. If he's an idiot, he doesn't get to the White House when the whole system opposes. But
guys, I love being able to promote Fume because when I'm promoting Fume, I'm promoting you regaining control of your health. Fume is one of the best ways to help people quit smoking and vaping. A Fume is made of a 100% Canadian maple. They have these cores you stick in the end with plant oils, which help you curb cravings. Most importantly, it helps you deal with that hand-to-mouth habit that smokers have. That ritual aspect is very hard for people to quit. This is a great step in between smoking and going cold turkey, which a lot of people can't handle. Smoking is expensive. It ruins your teeth. It makes your clothes smell, and it's trashy. Get control of your health by using Fume. They've helped over 50,000 people quit smoking. There's no smoke. There's no moving parts. It looks like a steampunk vape, and it's really, really cool. If you go to breathefume.com, breathefum.com/malice and use promo code malice, you get 10% off your entire order. That's breathefum.com/malice and use promo code malice for 10% off. Folks, Michael Malice here. You might know me as an author, podcaster, really horrible person on Twitter. But as you know, I'm also an underwear model. And the underwear that I model is sheath underwear. I love sheath underwear. I wear it every single day because the trick with sheath underwear is they've got the dual pouch technology, one part for one part of male anatomy, another part for another part of your male anatomy. First time you try them on, you're going to be like, okay, this is a little weird. And then you're like, oh, this is the most comfortable underwear I've ever owned. They've got a lot of different styles to choose from, including a style that I designed in a dynamite kind of color pattern, and it's really cool, limited edition. If you go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code malice, you get 20% off today. That's sheathunderwear.com, MALICE for 20% off. Comfort, performance, mobility, and it's the summer. They have this new mesh boxer brief as well, which will keep you cool, especially at the gym or if you're walking outside in the heat. sheathunderwear.com/malice for 20% off. Let's get back to the show. Something that is not disputable, even if let's suppose he is an idiot, the guy was a real estate magnate for many years. Yeah. So one thing he does know is negotiating and bluffs and telling you, oh, you definitely want to pay over ask for this building because yada, yada. So he knows he's like a poker player. Like a large part of the real estate market is being a poker player, dealing with expectations, the appearance of luxury, and so on and so forth. So at the very least, he's going to be very good at that, figuring out, okay, why does this person want this? What are their strengths? Where are their weaknesses? At this point, he's in his 70s. That's got to be second nature to him.
Absolutely. And this was, remember, when he was leaving the White House, was at the peak of you're going to get indicted, you're going to get impeached. Tell him you better not pardon Snowden or Assange. You better not declassify some of these documents, including documents that go back to the Kennedy assassination that were already supposed to be declassified. A lot of stuff about Russiagate. Paul Sperry, the investigative reporter for Real Clear Politics, put out a tweet saying he was receiving information that some of the reason for this raid was some of the agents involved were implicated in Spygate and Russiagate in those files.
Okay.
And they wanted those files not for the purposes of preserving them for the archives, but for destroying them.
And here's the other thing, to interrupt you. Their claim was we have to do a raid, or for any raid, you do it because you're worried about the person destroying evidence. But if they had contacted him and said, hey, you took these files, they're properly the property of the archives, at that point, it seems to kind of beggar belief that the former president would be like, well, I don't want you to have it, but I'm not allowed to have it, so I'm just going to burn it all. That doesn't seem plausible to me.
No, not at all. There is no, in fact, it's now coming out that he'd already complied with prior subpoenas. Okay. He'd already complied with private request. And definitely the case is, if this information is stuff that he wants exclusive possession of, there's no risk of it being destroyed, as you point out. No need for an extraordinary search warrant. And so that's why it tells me the fact they wanted the lights turned off, the fact the cameras turned off, the fact they would not allow any Trump person to watch what they were doing. So when you're doing a raid for your security, you can, when executing a search warrant for your security purposes, you can limit somebody's observational presence. Sure. But as a general rule, that's it. Unless they're a danger to your security, you're in their house. So they usually have a generally expected entitlement and right to watch it. In fact, one of the things the feds usually love to do is they do, no matter which agency it is, the IRS, anybody, the IRS is now getting all excited. There's about to be about another 100,000 of them, and they got guns and they got ammunition, and there's new ads saying, hey, would you like to shoot to kill? Come work for the IRS. Yeah. You put that basically in the ad. They love to do search warrants where they actually keep you on the premises, because they want to interrogate you and watch your reaction. Now, the search warrant is not a seizure of you as an individual. Right. It doesn't give you that right. But they use the shock and awe of it to get to interrogate you outside the presence of counsel, interrogate you. So often they want the person there. It's unusual that they want nobody there. They don't even want a lawyer to be able to even observe what is taking place. And they don't want any cameras going. And
let me ask this. If there are claiming that this is, look, we know what it looks like, but this is Trump crying wolf. This is very normal. We just want some files that belong to us. If anything, I would guess that you would want as much transparency as possible. You would want Fox there and ABC, have them censor so they don't have his, personal information, but be like, look, watch what we're doing. We're going in the safe. We're going in here. Here are the files we're taking. This is not phishing. We're just here to get specific files that belong to the archives that the former president had no right to have. And now you guys can go home and be assuaged that this isn't some deep state conspiracy out to get President Trump.
Exactly. I mean, you would contact, you'd want to do it while Trump is there for part one. They did just the opposite. They waited until they knew Trump was gone. Second, you would tell the Secret Service that they can tell Trump that they're coming in and doing the raid. Right. They told the Secret Service just the opposite. With you're not legally allowed to share this information with President Trump.
Wow. Okay.
Third, they would want the lawyer present to review the warrant to see what's allowed, because one of their tricks to say, hey, we got a search warrant. And this is for anybody out there. The reason why there's a presentment requirement in the Constitution is because often they'll come in and say they have a search warrant, but it's not to search what they're searching for or where they're searching, right? The search warrant might say you have a right to look in this set of the house for these set of records, not ransack the house, not seize your whole computer, not seize your whole phone, not do things they're not entitled to do. So that's the importance of presenting a warrant. You would want the person there to review the warrant, to make sure that, and then to observe them and let the cameras capture anything that they're doing to make sure everything is done legally correct, legally within, as you note, transparent.
Yeah.
They did none of that. Not only that, it appears they never produced an inventory of whatever it is they seized.
Oh, wow.
So it is common protocol because when they leave, they're supposed to give you an inventory, and they give you the inventory in order to look at it, whether it complies with the warrant.
Yeah.
That's part one. Part two, you can file a motion for return of seized property in federal court. And here, apparently, they didn't even give them an inventory. They might now. That's just confirmation and more confirmation of my hypothesis. They weren't there to get documents back from the National Archives. They weren't there to get documents that they thought Trump was going to destroy illegally. They were there to get documents that they wanted to destroy, that they want there to be no record of, no copy of, nothing to exist of, that Trump had in his back pocket as political leverage. And that's why you have no inventory. That's why you have no presentment. That's why they're lying to the Secret Service. That's why they're doing it while Trump isn't present. That's why they want the cameras off. That's why there's no documentation of what they actually took. That's what, so the pretext was to get information using a DC grand jury that would greenlight anything. And that's where the case gets even more interesting. The magistrate federal judge, and magistrates are not appointed by Congress. They're appointed by other judges. My view is federal magistrates should not have search warrant authority. Because in my experience, you can the feds can blow a leaf across the desk of a federal magistrate and he'll sign it. That they have very little meaningful constitutional gatekeeping oversight that they're actually employing. They have the power, but they don't utilize it hardly at all. So they go to a federal magistrate to get the search warrant. Most, in fact, any judge with any common sense would have been like, oh, wait, hold on a second. Yeah, this is the former president we're going to raid.
Yeah.
Maybe this needs to go through double, triple, quadruple levels of protocol. Their internal procedures require them to exhaust every other available remedy before they go to a search warrant, number one. And because it's politically sensitive, they have to get the approval of everybody. The attorney general has to sign off. The assistant attorney general has to sign off. Christopher Wray has to sign off. A whole bunch of high-ranking people have to sign off. And then the courts are supposed to make sure that happens and then be very careful about how the raid is conducted, given the sensitive political nature of the case. Apparently, none of that happens because they go to a magistrate who has a very unique history. This particular federal magistrate used to work for the Justice Department. When the Justice Department in South Florida opened an investigation into one Jeffrey Epstein. While he was at the Justice Department, he decided, I can make a lot more money if I leave the Justice Department and go work for Jeffrey Epstein, even with inside information he had concerning Jeffrey Epstein. That's exactly what he does. He goes over and is one of the lead lawyers who helps facilitate the cover-up of everything related to Jeffrey Epstein in 05, 06, 07, 08. After that, he becomes a big Democratic advocate. He says that what Lois Lerner did when she destroyed documents, had contempt of Congress, was using and weaponizing the IRS to go after political dissident groups, tax protesters, Tea Party folks, anybody that was anti-Obama, and got away with all of it. He was one of her lead public defenders. And then he gets
to interrupt to give people who don't remember this case, because I remember very well. Lois Lerner was head of the IRS. She was accused of very grossly disproportionately targeting right of center outlets, organizations, excuse me. I think what they did, they just searched for words like freedom or liberty in the organization's name. Those are the ones they knew to go for because those were code for right of center organizations. She was subpoenaed, I believe, and she claimed that the computer kind of crashed and they lost like 3 years of data. When a computer crashes, it doesn't wipe the hard drive. That's not a thing anymore. Then there was a backup and somehow that computer crashed also, and that was lost as well. And in regard to this brazen destruction of evidence, because again, this is the IRS. This isn't me or you. And, I'm sitting here like someone spilled a beer on my computer. Like when you're dealing with people's taxes and felonies, this is extremely crucial information that, it really has to be by the book and backed up repeatedly. Oh, we lost all the backups also. And there were no consequences for this, like whatsoever.
Completely. And if you know the IRS system, because I deal with a lot, I've been doing tax cases for a quarter of a century, they have, it's a network. So the idea that the system was anywhere on one computer was an obvious lie that everybody knew was an obvious lie. Now, probably the other search term they had was, let's see if anybody has bought Michael Malice's latest book. That they did a special audit. But that was, and to give you an idea, I was doing cases parallel at the same time because the IRS was using Obamacare to gather everybody's private medical records. They were going to medical records facilities that have massive databases of medical records, and they were seizing them in the name of the IRS to theoretically monitor individual mandate compliance. But what they had done, they had gathered all the records in one of the cases I brought, 60 million medical records, 10 million Americans. I brought the biggest Bivens class action in history at the time. They had the records of every judge in the state of California, not just the judge, their family members. They knew whose partner was getting sex addiction treatment, alcohol treatment, drug treatment, what they were talking about with their shrink. Which movie director had 4 fetuses, not just the one publicly known, which actor actually had 3 undisclosed heart attacks that would make him unbondable, which Major League Baseball player had undisclosed injuries. I called it J. Edgar Hoover's wet dream of a blackmail file.
Yeah.
And they had gathered all of it. Lerner was doing that at the same time. It was going to be the biggest political private, and this goes on top of all the information they already have from your tax returns.
Of course.
Where you disclose who you live with, you disclose what your family relationships are, you disclose who your intimate partners are, you disclose who your family is, you disclose what your religion is, you disclose what your political party is because you say who you made donations and contributions to. You disclose your everyday lifestyle.
Yeah.
And there's a guy who wrote a book called Confessions of a Tax Collector that read like Lord Conrad going into the heart of the jungle, saying that when you dig in, you just, because it's about him going insane kind of as a tax collector. He was like, within a few keystrokes, I could know more about your life than your wife did.
Yeah.
Because of how much people didn't realize is being disclosed in that world. And so that's what was going on at the time in terms of all of that activity. And it paralleled at the sort of pretext parallels aspects of what's happening now. So it clearly has nothing to do with actually worrying about documents, given this is a traditional conflict that happens all the time, given they had all kinds of other remedies, given Trump was already in negotiation with him, and given the way they executed this warrant is completely not consistent with the narrative we're seeing from the media. The much more likely narrative. Now, there are some people who thought that means they're about to indict Trump. This is about January 6th. I don't think any of that is true. I think this is not, there's still a risk of that. But if they thought indicting Trump would work, they just saw the political blowback from just doing a search warrant. And so they should wake up to realize that would be a nightmare that would push America over a political precipice it never has. Because we've already seen the political blowback. For a long time, many people on the right were the last defenders of J. Edgar Hoover's creation of the FBI, which people tend to keep forgetting. It's like when people say, oh, it's just recent. A lot of my conservative friends are, this is just the last couple of years the FBI's got out of hand. It's like this organization was created by J. Edgar Hoover.
He deported Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman to the Soviet Union during it was 1919.
Yes, he placed a wide range of blame on anarchist groups for the Palmer raids that he most likely manufactured and fabricated as a way to create the FBI in the first place.
Yes.
He magically showed up at the scene of aspects of some of the there's all kinds of interesting Hoover stories connected to that. But you're talking about one of the most corrupt, if there's a personification of the idea of the deep state, it is J. Edgar Hoover.
And shamelessly so.
Completely. And so the only difference is it's a little bit overt right now. It was Hoover operated more in secret in terms of his most illicit activities.
Right.
His lies were public, but his bad acts were usually private. Here, the FBI is saying you're doing this out in the open. Now, I think they thought this wouldn't get publicly disclosed. They went in under plain clothes. They didn't politically leak it. It's not like they don't have a history of doing that when they want to. They didn't politically leak it to anybody. And my guess is they thought Trump will be embarrassed. Most Americans are. Most Americans don't disclose, hey, the FBI came by my house today. That's something you keep your mouth shut about, right? But of course, not Trump. Trump was disclosing it while the raid was going on. He was out, doing his version of tweet. Oh my God, look at this. Look what they're doing to your president. Da, da, da. I think that shocked them. I think they didn't see that coming. They thought we're going to go in there, shock and awe, grab what we need to grab, destroy what we need to destroy, and whatever Trump's leverage is, it's only in his head. It's not in documentary form. He can't share it with a third party. He can't. They probably told that on paperwork, we'll probably find that they said, "Oh, a foreign government. Trump's going to give this to a foreign government."
Oh,
and it says, we got to get it now before he gives it to him. There's no way that's the case, right? But it'll probably be Russiagate recreated, that version. And there probably are curious who Trump has distributed this information to.
Folks, summer's starting to wind down. Fall can get a bit chaotic, but Factor's ready-to-eat meal delivery makes it easy to stay on top of a busy schedule while sticking to goals. Factor's the perfect meal solution for an on-the-go lifestyle. Quick lunch at your desk, fully prepared dinner. You don't have to have cleanup. They've got you covered for weeks when free time just isn't a thing. Factor makes lunch and dinner on busy days a total breeze. The meals are fresh and never frozen, and they're delivered ready to heat and eat in 2 minutes. You can fuel up fast and get on with your day. And they were very smart because they gave me some to try, and I very much enjoyed them. And they also fit my macros. They've got lots of different choices, depending what you like. So they have a vegan and veggie one, a keto one, calorie smart one, protein plus. They've got cold pressed juices, smoothies, semi-some smoothies. I really enjoyed those. Head to go.factor75.com/welcome130 and use code welcome130. You get $130 off across 6 boxes. That's code welcome130 at go.factor75.com/welcome130 for $130 off. You're going to save time. You're going to save money. And then you can sit in front of the computer even longer and watch me and Robert and whatever else you guys do. Great food, decent price, saves you a lot of time.
Hello, this is Johnny Lieberman and Ed Lowe from Motor Trend's podcast, The Inevitable. This is the podcast where we talk about the future of the car, whether cars are electric, whether they run on something else, maybe they drive themselves, maybe they don't even have drivers. Coming up, we have all sorts of fascinating guests, such as...
Derek Jenkins, head of design at Lucid Motors. We have the famous character actor and environmentalist Ed Begley Jr.
Yeah, that guy's been driving an EV since 1970. We've got automotive influencer Miss Amelia Hartford and another automotive influencer, sorry Matt, Mr. Matt Farah from the Smoking Tire podcast.
EV racers Ben and Randy from Unplugged Performance. And then a guy you might have heard of from the NFL, Minnesota Vikings linebacker Eric Kendricks.
Gabrielle Fluffy Iglesias, and we've got some celebrity chefs. Between them, they have 2 Michelin stars. We're talking about Sang Yoon and Michael Cimarusti.
As well as Heinrich Fisker, electric vehicle pioneer.
So if any of this interests you, please come and check out The Inevitable. You can find it on podcast1.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to watch the video, head on over to motortrend.com.
Let's get back to the show. You know what I'm really concerned about, like where my thoughts are today? President Trump's in his mid-70s, right? He's no spring chicken. God forbid if he has a fatal heart attack or a stroke or something like that. I think there's a huge percentage of this population that would not believe it. And I think the reaction to that could be terrifying.
Oh, no doubt about it. Now, I think you saw the former police commissioner of New York go on public TV this week and say he thinks there's a serious risk of assassination for President Trump. And then you go, like, people have asked me the most historical analog to this. In other words, where you had the deep state up against someone that either was president or trying to be president with a realistically chance of getting in. And I said, you have to go back to the Kennedy brothers. The last time you had this kind of almost open overt warfare with a president or presidential candidate was John Kennedy in 1963 and Robert Kennedy in 1968. And both of them were assassinated.
Wait, there's another one more recent, because Spiro Agnew, I'm just writing about this in the White Pill. He was Nixon's vice president. He resigned from office. He later claimed that the reason that he resigned from the vice presidency, not because he was guilty, he pled no contest, but because he was told, if you don't resign, we're going to assassinate you.
Oh, and I'm sure that there's no question. We now know. I actually brought it up with Ben Bradley many years ago when he's still the editor of the Washington Post before he passed on. We now know that Deep Throat was, in fact, the deep state. It was Mark Felt. Mark Felt was the man who ran COINTELPRO, was neck deep in corruption, was a deep Hooverite. And he's the one who got revenge and took out Nixon. And we now know more information about the plumbers. I mean, the plumbers who were involved were all deep state operatives. You know, they're people who have weird histories. You know, Frank Sturgis. I mean, this guy shows up everywhere. 1958, he's hanging out with Fidel in Havana. 1970s, he's hanging out with Yasser Arafat in North Africa. In between, he's doing a lot of interesting gigs, including showing up on the Watergate burglary list. And then you have a lot of other what was really going on that day of what they were looking at in Watergate.
And it goes both ways. And there was, I forget the name of the reporter who leaked the Pentagon Papers to the White House, to the New York Times. There was discussion in the White House, which was later admitted to. This isn't Alex Jones, which we're going to get to in a second, where they were like either wanted to try to kill him or to drug him to completely discredit him. So these kind of discussions happen in Washington, and Americans have this view that this only happens in like the third world in like 1960.
Oh, exactly. I mean, we went from about 80% confidence in America to our core institutions to 20% within about a decade.
Yeah.
But the main reason was because we had one president killed, a leading presidential candidate killed, the leading civil rights leader killed, the man they considered a potential black messiah and Malcolm X killed, and another president taken out and by impeachment and resignation that had never happened before in American history. So people saw that over 10 years and they're like, something's seriously wrong.
Yeah.
And then we had the church committee and we had the House Committee on Assassinations and all the rest. And that's why we're seeing political talk now from the last defenders of the thin blue line, who didn't understand that thin blue line was erased a long time ago by J. Edgar Hoover's creation of the FBI, but are now realizing fully and appreciate. It's like I say, Trump, whether deliberately or accidentally, exposes the corruption of our system.
Yes.
And here he exposed it on a massive scale. And you're seeing major conservatives call for the end of the FBI. But it's like, it's fascinating to watch.
This saying doesn't hold true nowadays, but you and I are both old enough to remember, maybe this applied as of 2015, where the expression is a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged. But then the other caveat to that is a liberal who is a conservative who's been arrested. With the historic, especially the far left, the use of Miranda and things like civil rights people who are arrested, their whole point is like, look, people get railroaded all the time. The standard kind of bourgeois conservative response is like, oh, you're just covering for criminals. This isn't really a thing. Sure, it happens once in a while. I think nowadays, especially after what happened with COVID, where people were arrested for having, weren't allowed to see their mom in the hospital. Gyms were fined hundreds of thousands of dollars, even though no one got sick in the gym. And this is a population clearly dedicated to maintaining optimum health. It's harder and harder, I think, for conservatives to be like, you can put anything past these people.
Exact. Trump has woken up a wide, particularly the populist wing, but even more and more institutional conservatives, that our system, the deep state, is a corrupt mechanism of government. It's the core. It's the problem of ever concentrating power.
Yeah.
It's like, why do we have an FBI? We really don't need one. I mean, crime is supposed to be a local state jurisdictional issue anyway. So get rid of the FBI. This is a Hoover abomination in the first place. Scrap it. We don't need it. The CIA can be dramatically limited. But really, we should do what John Kennedy talked about doing, scattering it to the wind. And it should just be an intelligence gathering organization to the degree it exists at all, not involved in covert operations. Bad idea. We've seen that for almost more than half a century now. And so conservatives are starting to wake up to the need for institutional reform because they're witnessing how the system will openly and overtly abuse its power as to Trump. And I think whatever Trump has in these documents, their willingness and readiness to risk major political blowback with an unprecedented action tells me there's something in there they are really, truly concerned about.
And not only that, there's dozens of court cases involving members of Congress of both parties, sexual harassment cases that were settled, and those are all sealed. And there's not even any kind of attempt to make them public. When the news with Amy Rohrbach broke, that ABC News was covering up for Jeffrey Epstein, and she said we had him, we had the goods. The story was killed partly on behalf of Buckingham Palace. Kevin McCarthy, who's currently the House Minority Leader, head of the Republicans in the House, was livid. And he sent the ABC News a sternly worded letter saying, like, what is going on? You're covering for Jeffrey Epstein. I can understand maybe you didn't want to run the story because you were scared of legal exposure. Why didn't you call the authorities? This is, at the very least, I can understand you wouldn't run a news story, whatever. And then nothing came of it. So a lot of this republicanism of shaking their fist, the Republicans do not have clean hands. Dennis Hastert, who was the longest serving Republican Speaker of the House in history, who was Dick Cheney's right-hand man, was a convicted pedophile before he was in Congress. So there's a lot. This drives me crazy on Twitter when people are like, think this is like a leftist or a Republican thing. And it's just like, these two parties are so corrupt. It's almost incomprehensible.
Like the great meme maker from the Alex Jones cases, that brief technological interruption, I apologize entirely to the Clinton family and the NSA and CIA. I have nothing to do with any of those things. I take it all back. I retract it. By the way, the same magistrate who approved the warrant just had to recuse himself 2 weeks before he issued the warrant. in Trump's lawsuit against the Clintons because of his deep ties to the Clintons and Obamas.
Wow.
So it's like you couldn't script this any better if you were Trump. And by the way, how people wonder, how did that happen? It's because the feds went judge shopping. One of the problems in our system is they're not obligated to seek out a random or particular judge. They can find which magistrate they want and go into that magistrate and say, oh, I got a warrant. Can you sign it? And it's a big problem because they're going to go to the one that is most likely to sign it without questions.
Do you have any more thoughts on the raid before we move on to the next subject?
No, I think we live in interesting times. What I like about the raid is that the political blowback is significant enough that people are waking up to the need for institutional reform, particularly on the political right.
I remember I don't want to say the person's name. I had dinner. There's like 5 of us at dinner. And one of the people at this dinner was a former CIA agent. And he was talking about how we need CIA reform. And one of the things he mentioned as a sign of corruption is there's some kind of rule or law in place. I believe it's CIA, not FBI. Maybe I'm getting them confused. I apologize for my ignorance. And like, I can't look up like an ex-girlfriend's Gmail, right? Like I'm not allowed to. What I can do is call my contact in France and say, hey, can you, this is a name of interest, get me their Gmail. And they do it, and there's reciprocity. And he was talking about how, this just shows how corrupt the agency is. And I'm like, I'm sitting there, I'm like, I don't know how you can sit here and be like, this is like the tax code and it's just complicated. These people should be in jail at a very minimum. This is so beyond acceptable. I don't even know where to start. And it's just, and there's no way you can even claim that, you're like, like how if someone's a murderer and maybe you would plant evidence because it's like, we don't have enough on him, but I know the guy killed people, so I'm really scared he's going to walk. Like you could wrap your head around that where like, I'm going to break the law in order to kind of get a bad, like Al Capone going to jail for tax fraud or tax evasion. Like that wasn't his crime, but like, we got to get this guy off the streets. But this is just, you can't think you're doing this and it's the right thing. In your heart, you're doing evil. And when someone knowingly does evil, they're evil.
Oh, no doubt. And they laundered all kinds of intel through Russiagate. That's what a lot of Russiagate was. Laundering intel from foreign sources, laundering intel from the same source, but putting in the hands of 8 different people. So you could say 8 different people independently confirmed something. Yeah. It's like, it's reading Our Man in Havana. It's reading Taylor of Panama or watching either one of those films. It's how the intelligence community really operates, whether you're talking about Graham Greene or Jean Le Carré. So the same, people are just getting exposed to it now on a scale they hadn't before because of Trump. And the Trump war on the deep state is coming. And this is accelerating and escalating the possibilities of 2024 actually leading to meaningful reform. To, if Republicans getting in, at least create a Frank Church committee. We need a new church committee to expose all of these bad acts by the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, the State Department, the Defense Department. We have stories now about how General Milley was conspiring basically a de facto coup 7 days in May in live time during 2020 against Trump. All of this needs to get publicly unveiled and publicly disclosed. What exactly the issue is with biolabs in Ukraine or other places, everything related to Ukraine, this massive now it's starting to come out, the degree of arms laundering and money laundering and human trafficking that the deep state's been involved with. All of this should come out with major hearings, and hopefully a little raid in Mar-a-Lago is what triggers it all.
So you were Alex Jones' attorney for a period. You have a good relationship with him. Let's talk about the 2 Alex Jones cases, because people might not realize that there's 2 parallel cases, one in Texas, one in Connecticut. Texas is the one here in Austin. The judge gave him a summary judgment, which basically means there wasn't a period to adjudicate the facts of the case. The judge preemptively said, okay, this is a black and white situation. We could just fast forward to damages. You're ipso facto guilty, if I'm using the word ipso facto correctly. They gave $5 million in damages and then 44.5, I believe, in punitive damages for a total of around $50 million. One of the other things that was very buzzworthy is apparently Alex's attorney handed over all the contents of his phone to the prosecution team, never told Alex, never even said, wait a minute, this is privileged information. You can't include it into the record, because I believe if they sent it by accident, I immediately called the lawyer and says, well, that was by accident. That lawyer cannot legally use it or look at it. That really is kind of something taken seriously. His lawyer didn't even do that. He got ambushed with that on the stand. Apparently he said he never used emails. but the prosecutor said, the plaintiff, excuse me, said, no, here are some emails. So can you break down whether that is accurate? And this all seems very unusual to me.
No doubt. I mean, Alex Jones is once again the canary in the coal mine.
Okay.
And because so much of institutional conservative opinion wants to distance itself from Alex Jones, that consequently, just like they ignored it during the massive takeout in 2018, Allison Morrow did a great breakdown where she said, go back and look at what they said in 2018. They were like, oh, this is just unique to Alex Jones. This won't be more broadly applied. We don't oppose dissident opinions. We don't oppose anything labeled conspiracy theories. This was just unique hate speech. Of course, they couldn't document what hate speech Alex Jones had ever done. Right. It was a giveaway. They were seeing what they could get away with Jones, so they could ultimately culminate in the president of the United States, while he's president of the United States, getting deplatformed using the Jones template to do it. It's not a coincidence they take out Jones with weaponized lawfare, and a week later they have the confidence to go after the president of the United States in an unprecedented search warrant and raid and ransacking of his private home. So it's because they saw one as a green light for the other, and because so many civil libertarians, and like Alan Dershowitz, and institutional conservatives like Megyn Kelly and others are not paying attention to the core facts of what happened in Alex Jones, because the core fact, the media narrative is going to be Alex Jones said untrue things about a couple of plaintiffs related to that were victims of that were parents of the victims of Sandy Hook, that a jury found him liable for those false statements. They issued big verdicts because of how much damage it had done. And that will be the media narrative. Almost all that media narrative is false. Truth is, Alex Jones is being sued not just for things he said about specific people, because in fact, he never said anything about specific people that are suing him. The people that are suing him on the grounds that they felt emotionally offended and upset by him questioning the government's narrative about a big public event. And people need to process what that means in terms of precedent. Anybody who raises, they actually ask these questions during the deposition stage, that shouldn't Alex Jones realize merely questioning who committed a crime, merely questioning what was responsible or culpable for a crime, what could be offensive to people that are related to victims of the crime, and that he should be sued for doing that. That would apply to questioning 9/11, Oklahoma City. That would to anybody who questioned anything related to COVID. You know, anybody. So they're trying to, and in fact, MSNBC legal analysts were on TV this week saying this can now be used to take out independent content creators in what they call the misinformation space about elections, COVID, Biden family, etc. So that's the goal, is to weaponize the legal system to bankrupt people for dissident opinions. And the question then is, how do they get there? They got there because they denied Alex Jones his day in court. I mean, what defines the American legal system? When we were in the 1930s attacking the Soviet show trials, the first time that language started getting utilized in legal discourse and public discourse in America, our point was, hey, the big difference is in America, you always have your day in court. Alex Jones has never got his day in court. And they used every trick in the book to deny him. Like, there's people who still tell me, oh, Alex never participated in discovery. Alex sat for hundreds of hours of depositions himself personally, plus all the InfoWars people, produced over 1 million pages of documents and information. Anybody who watched the trial could see they had every video, every text, every email, every piece of information that could be available. They had depositions testimony from everybody. They had deposition after deposition after deposition after deposition from Alex Jones. They had all his financial information. They had all the company's financial information, all the employment information that wasn't even relevant to the case in the first place.
Right.
And yet he was denied any trial on the merits to a jury, which is a violation of federal and state constitutional rights in Texas, and will happen in Connecticut and then the upcoming case. And there's another case in Texas. And to give people an idea of how crazy the legal case is, in case people think this is just about Sandy Hook family suing over specific statements about them, never was. There's an FBI guy suing Alex Jones in Connecticut, an FBI guy who has no connection to any victim on Sandy Hook, just because he investigated Sandy Hook. So that's the legal precedent they're trying to set, that the FBI could sue us for second guessing what they did.
Right.
That's how terrifying it is from a free speech perspective. The second part is how they eviscerated his day in court, violated due process rights, rights to jury trials, rights to counsel, rights to confront accusers, all of it stripped. He was denied rights to dismiss based on his extrajudicial speech that didn't happen inside a courtroom. They said, you said things we don't like on your show, so now we're going to strip you of your procedural rights. No right to bring an anti-slap motion, no right to bring a motion to dismiss, no right to bring a summary judgment motion, no right to appeal. Then at trial, they introduced a wide range of evidence that had nothing to do with what was supposedly on trial. So they do a trial just on damages. Well, that means the only trial should be about damages.
Yes,
Instead,
correct. Yeah.
90% of the case had nothing to do with damages. Why was that? In Austin, Texas, in that trial, people keep saying, oh, that case was in Texas, Bob. It's a conservative place. Austin ain't. Austin had 20% of the people in Travis County voted for Trump. It has a strong liberal authoritarian bent in the current, modern liberal authoritarian bent, like the statist of the 1920s and 30s. These are not your free speech Berkeley movement liberals of the 1960s.
Right.
Not the same crowd. And so what happened, they manipulated the jury selection. If you were a juror and you said you weren't willing to give over $100 million, the highest verdict ever in a comparable case in the history of the world, you were excluded. Whereas if you wanted that, you were put on the jury. If you said that you had doubts about whether Alex Jones had been treated fairly always by the media, you're out. If you said, oh, the media's always been honest about Alex Jones, you're in. So they manipulated that aspect of the case.
Did his attorneys not have the right to kick people off the jury themselves?
They had limited rights. So what was happening is normally both sides get only a few what's called peremptory strikes. The rest are strikes for cause as dictated by the court. Also, historically, you're not allowed to ask, oh, you're going to rule in my favor at the end of the case.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay.
And yet the plaintiffs, that's what was happening. Hey, are you ready to give 100 million? Yeah, who's ready to give 100 million? And if anybody's any doubt about what the case is all about, they can just listen to the plaintiff's lawyer's own closing statements to the jury, which actually use the phrase, take him out. That's what they said. Stuff that if Jones had said, they would have stuck him in jail.
Yeah.
So they said, prevent him from ever being on, not only take him off the air now, prevent him from ever being on the air. And not just him, anybody like him. Election deniers, COVID deniers, war people that deny who's good and bad in public wars, who's good and bad in law enforcement, etc. And so they stripped him of every rule of due process. They stripped him of every rule of evidence. The court issued. People were saying this made the trial in Idiocracy look like a perfect trial by comparison, because you had a judge up there who's over 100 times granting whatever objection the plaintiffs make, almost never granting any objection the defense makes. She introduced evidence about Alex's statements, out-of-court statements about the jury. That's never been allowed in the history of America. They introduced part of my statements about how the case was scripted, but they only allowed 5 seconds of my statement to be read. That was not only not relevant, and I wasn't a party opponent, but also it violated what's called the rule of completeness, which you can't just take altered clips or altered pieces of a letter or a document and present that as the evidence. You have to present the whole context. Jones was denied. They wouldn't allow any of that to come in on Jones' behalf. They wouldn't allow Jones to present any defense evidence whatsoever. During the punitive damages stage, he wasn't allowed to present any evidence at all. During the substantive stage, if he ever started defending himself, the judge started scolding him and saying, no, truth is what I say it is. Truth isn't what you think it is, Mr. Jones. It was like a 1984 Orwell moment. Repeat after me, Alex Jones. 2 + 2 = 5, and so forth. And to give people an idea of how default happened, the more Alex Jones asserted his innocence, the more he said, I don't have evidence that proves my guilt because I'm not guilty. They said, ha, that proves you're guilty. That's what they did to him.
Right.
I'm back. Sorry, CIA. I apologize one more time to the Clinton family profusely and profligately. Why was there any trial at all?
Right.
Because you had 3 movie cameras in the room. You had a movie camera staring down the jury the entire time. They knew they were part of a movie. The people who did the Leaving Neverland documentary were given exclusive rights to film the entire trial. So that's why all of a sudden the judge, who's a mask lover, suddenly has no mask because she's going to be featured in the future documentary. And as long as you have there's a legal rule in America that if what you report is what came out of a courtroom, as long as you accurately reported what took place in that courtroom, you can't be sued even if you're repeating a lie. And so this whole trial was to script a lie about Alex Jones, and that thus a lot of evidence came in that was against him that had no bearing. A lot of evidence was presented in altered manner, without completeness, and he wasn't allowed to present anything, and none of it had anything to do with what was actually on trial because it was for the movie company. So they can make a documentary that tells a false story about Alex Jones that he can't sue about because they're just reproducing what happened in the court.
Guys, we got a different kind of sponsor for this episode. It's the Jordan Harbinger Show. It's a podcast you should really be listening to. Every day, someone tells you just have to listen to some podcast, and you nod and say, sure, you don't listen to it. Don't let that happen here. Jordan's Show, which Apple named one of its best of 2018, is aimed at making you a better informed, more critical thinker so you could get a sense of how the world actually works and come to your own conclusions about what's happening, even inside your own brain. Because each episode is a convo with a different fascinating guest. And when I say there's something for everyone here, I mean that. One episode, he's talking to a hostage negotiator from the FBI. Another episode, it's a cinematographer who discovered a lost city in the jungle. Jordan's always focusing on pulling useful, practical insights from his brilliant guests. Not talking about pop psychology or some self-help stuff. The episodes are loaded with bits of wisdom you can use to change your mind and improve your life right away. And if that's not worth checking out, I'm not sure what is. I know it isn't, and that's part of the problem. Total waste of time. We really enjoy this show, and we think you will as well. Search for the Jordan Harbinger Show. That's HARB as in boy, IN as in Nancy, GER on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And the URL is jordanharbingershow.com/subscribe. On Apple Podcasts at jordanharbinger.com/iTunes. And if you want to learn more about Jordan, interesting guy, go to jordanharbinger.com/about. Hey guys, you ever feel like you're being followed around the internet and maybe advertisers know a bit too much about you? So Ipvanishvpn helps you take back your privacy and helps you become anonymous on the internet. So it's a virtual private network, a VPN for short, which is a tool that helps you browse the internet. You can use Ipvanish on your computer, tablet, phone, Fire Stick when you stream media. When you use a VPN, all your data is encrypted. What you're reading, what you're watching, what you're searching, whatever it is you're doing. And it's important because what you're doing on the internet isn't anyone's business but yours. Ipvanish is offering for listeners of the show 65% off their annual plan. It's only $375 a month to protect yourself. Super easy to use, even for you boomers. You turn it on with one click, and it runs in the background to protect you while you're browsing the web. If you run into a problem, Ipvanish has 24/7 support by email, chat, and phone. All you got to do is go to ipvanish.com/malice. Use promo code malice, MALICE. You get 65% off. Their annual plan is just $44.99 for a year with our discount. This is the time to sign up. Ipvanish is the best. They've got 4.7 out of 5 on Trustpilot with more than 6,000 reviews. All you got to remember is ipvanish.com/malice to get the deal and start protecting your data online. Let's get back to the show. One of the things that I think conservatives don't appreciate, and I'd love to hear your perspective as an attorney, is, they watch all these court shows and the judge is, this kind of austere elder gentleman or elder woman who's sitting there kind of musing and is kind of tough and no nonsense. But my understanding is when it comes to the courtroom system, very often inside that court, it is anarchy in the chaotic sense that the judges can do pretty much anything they damn well please. You have some people on the bench, I'm not saying this judge, but who have no business adjudicating anything, and there's no accountability for them whatsoever. And that's a lot closer to the truth. You have to be basically an activist in a dress rather than someone who's an austere, personally, I think this, but the law says this, so that my hands are tied. Is my impression accurate in your opinion?
Oh, no doubt. And this judge, I encouraged anyone to watch it. People who are anti-Alex Jones were cheering this judge because of how overtly anti-Alex Jones she was.
Okay.
She got elected saying, I'll give everybody their day in court. I'll be fair. I'll be neutral. I'll be impartial. Nobody who watched even a part of the trial came away with the conclusion, if I was Alex Jones, I would want this person as my judge. I would thought she was impartial. She was so overtly, and she has a long social media page of, this is what a social justice warrior as a judge looks like. If people want to see what that is, regardless of what they care about Alex Jones, they get to watch it in live time. Watch how over the top she is, how sarcastic she is. She refers to the jury as her jury. She's praiseworthy of the plaintiffs, hypercritical of the defendants. And as you note, one of the things that happened was the plaintiff's lawyer gets up and gives a speech, which you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to be questioning the witness at the time, in which he claims that Alex Jones's lawyer gave him all of the attorney-client privilege files and personal files. Now, two things about that. One is what that lawyer admitted to was a patent violation of law and ethics in America. Okay. In most courtrooms, they would have sanctioned him and he would have been up for potential disbarment. Instead, the plaintiff's lawyer is publicly rewarded. The same Texas State Bar that's worried about what Sidney Powell said about elections and is going after her is doing nothing about this openly corrupt rogue plaintiff's lawyer. Because all of us as lawyers in America, somebody sends us stuff accidentally in the legal world, just happens all the time due to the nature of technology. And so what happened here was some information got uploaded to a Dropbox file by a paralegal that was the raw information. It was the wrong information. The plaintiff's counsel lets the defense lawyer knows this looks like a mistake happened. What happened is Alex Jones' lawyer wrote back, disregard that link. Just get rid of that. We'll send you a new one, thinking that was the end of it. Didn't know the plaintiff's lawyer ran in and downloaded the entire file and was sharing it with anybody, even intimate photos of Alex Jones's wife. By the way, this is a guy who's been defaulted because he never participated in discovery, right? And how do they have his entire phone file if he never participated in discovery? That's a lie that people like Megyn Kelly and others are repeating out there. Now, I don't think Megyn Kelly knows it's a lie because the media just accepts. It's fascinating to always watch the conservative media's willingness to buy the media's version of events, this sort of, I think, Geller man or whatever it's called, that form of amnesia where this is an untrustworthy source and then you start citing it again.
Right. It's
the same thing where we're seeing it in some aspects of the Trump thing. The David French of the world. Well, let's wait. Maybe they had a legitimate reason to do this raid. It's like, come on, you don't have to be a genius to figure out Pravda is no longer reliable. But this is the same mindset here with Jones, where people are repeating and regurgitating completely false stories about the guy. So he was completely stripped of his rights to present his own trial, to present his own defense, to have his day in court. His First Amendment rights are being severely infringed upon. It turned out this information that the lawyer had was illegally obtained. Also, a lawyer cannot waive attorney-client privilege.
Okay.
Only the client can. So and this lawyer was admitting, hey, Alex, I have stuff that you never gave me authorized to have me. That was an admission of an ethics violation right there in open court. I mean, extraordinary that he suffered no consequences.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like if I mail you like a bloody glove that, I killed somebody with, and you're the prosecutor, there might be other things you could do, but you can't use that because it wasn't obtained lawfully.
Exactly.
Like if someone doesn't have if someone has a faulty search warrant and they find evidence in my house that shows I committed a crime, they can't admit that into court because it hasn't been acquired through ethical legal means.
And to give you an idea of how the disparity is such a joke, compare the other mistake that got made in discovery. The plaintiffs in Connecticut turned over their medical records as part of the case because they're alleging certain physical emotional injury. That information was then shared with Jones's Texas counsel because he was going to be stepping into the Connecticut case at one point. The paralegal accidentally uploaded that to the plaintiff's lawyers in Texas. When they found that out, they took it down. What's happened? The courts in Texas and Connecticut are ordering sanctions hearing for Alex Jones's lawyers as to why that ever happened. So note the disparity. They accidentally turned something over, and they're going to be subject to potential disbarment. The plaintiff's lawyers deliberately, overtly, by his own admission, steals records that don't belong to him, shares it with third parties, and he's getting rewarded in the court of public opinion.
What about this conspiracy theory I've seen on the internet that Alex's attorneys did this on purpose in order to force a mistrial?
No, because they had 25 other grounds for a mistrial. Okay. So this information, I have no doubt that it was done accidentally because they also turned over medical records this was done by a paralegal. So these kind of cases have so much discovery. You usually have a paralegal involved. These technical errors, you're trying to upload to their own file. They accidentally upload to somebody else's file. Happens all the time. What was extraordinary about this case was the plaintiff's lawyers flagrantly violating the rules about this and being rewarded by the judges for doing so.
What is the next steps for Alex in Texas? And what are going to be the next steps for him in Connecticut? Because I believe in Connecticut, that judge as well gave him a summary judgment, and Alex is not going to have a back and forth with the witnesses and like that.
The Connecticut judge has been just as egregiously bad as the Texas judge. And what's been fascinating is people say, well, two different judges have ruled something. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me, right? Yes, I get there are two judges, and the whole judiciary as a whole is biased against Alex Jones. That's a proven reality.
That's like saying, well, both the senators in my state voted for this bill. It's like, okay, yeah.
Exactly. It has it's a deference to authority is what it really is. And judges, particularly state court judges, but judges in general don't deserve such deference. And so so for Jones, the punitive damages of that he has that Texas case, another Texas case, and another Connecticut case. And by the way, this is a guy who prior to 2017 had never been sued in 25 years. Okay. Then suddenly he's sued or legal claims brought against him in over 25 contexts within 12 months. Does anybody really think that had nothing to do with his political speech?
Right, right.
It's obvious what they're doing, as the plaintiff's lawyers admitted. The whole goal is to take him out and never allow, like what they said about Trump, when they said, take him out and never allow another Trump to rise again. Right. Remember when like Obama, high-ranking Obama people were saying that? They said explicitly the same about Alex Jones. That's what they're trying to do. And ultimately, Alex Jones is everybody and everybody is Alex Jones. So that's the perils of these precedents. But he's got another Texas case upcoming. And then the Connecticut case has like eight or nine plaintiffs. And it's in Connecticut where Sandy Hook occurred. These are the same group of people that just shook down the Remington for $77 million on a claim that had no legal basis. But the courts in Connecticut refused to enforce the law because it's Sandy Hook, because it's guns, because they're all very overtly political up there. And so all of the Connecticut cases stayed, and the other Texas cases stayed, and the Texas judgment is stayed because InfoWars has filed for bankruptcy.
Okay.
And that's Free Speech Systems. And to give people an idea of how ridiculous the plaintiff's case was, they said InfoWars, without Alex Jones, without any commitment or involvement of Alex Jones on an ongoing basis, if he disappeared tomorrow, InfoWars media company was worth close to $250 million. Does anybody think someone's going to pay $230 million to InfoWars without Alex Jones just for the web domain? I mean, that's literally all you have. You have a media company. It's a web domain. That's your only asset. You don't have any other assets because Alex Jones isn't under exclusive contract. So so that gives you an idea of where it is. So it's in bankruptcy because InfoWars owes more debt than it has in payment. His goal is to restructure, pay off all of these debts, come to some much more reasonable number, and continue to restore InfoWars. In Texas, he has broad defenses against personal collection. You can have a residence, what they call your homestead exemption in Texas can be like 200 acres. Okay. So they can't, like, that's not collectible. Your retirement's not collectible. Your 401k is not collectible. Your wages are not collectible. A wide range of government payments are not collectible. Up to 50 grand of personal assets is not collectible. So Texas has some of the best defenses against personal collection in the country. So there's limits to how much they can harass Alex Jones. The punitive damages judgment itself is illegal under Texas law. It has to be reduced from 45 million to 1.5 million. The plaintiffs.
What's the law there? Can you explain that?
Sure. So Texas didn't want punitive judgment verdicts to get out of hand. They knew people would, particularly what would happen is in liberal democratic jurisdictions would punish people on the right in some industry that they don't like or something else. So because of that, back in 2003, Texas law changed and said, if your only damages are not economic damages, and the plaintiffs here, that's all of their damages were not economic damages, emotional damages, even loss to reputation is considered non-economic, is up to $750,000 or the amount awarded, unless the amount awarded is greater than $750,000. So what it boils down to is, by law, the punitive damages has to be reduced to $750,000 per plaintiff per defendant.
And my understanding also is this, something you and I discussed briefly in person. They're saying that these damages, these emotional damages, are on top of their real emotional damages, which is their kids were murdered. I mean, this is something I wouldn't wish on almost anyone. And you get that phone call. I can't imagine what that's like. You're never going to recover. It's just the most horrific thing ever. And then also there's some asshole on the internet, running their mouth and talking nonsense about you. But in terms of which is causing the emotional harm, I think in terms of proportionality, it just seems kind of ludicrous to say, I was doing okay with this until Alex Jones came along.
Well, exactly. At multiple levels, if a jury was this is why they couldn't allow the evidence to come in.
Okay.
We had tested it with a range of focus groups and other groups out there. The average jury verdict, actually half of the jurors were for Alex Jones and were ruling in his favor once they found out all the facts. So that would have been shocking to the system. Alex Jones wins the Sandy Hook case. That would have crushed him. It would have backfired. That's why they could never let him present his evidence in court. That's why they were always going to default him. They were going to find any pretext they could because they couldn't allow him to present his evidence, even to a liberal Democratic jury pool like Austin or Connecticut. Of the other groups, the average verdict was $100,000. Okay, because in all of these cases, to my knowledge, they never introduced evidence that they ever timely requested a correction, retraction, or apology request. So if you're saying, you know what, my emotional trauma is not from the death of my son, but is from Alex Jones, what would an ordinary person do? They would complain about somebody falsely reporting about them. These plaintiffs never did. They didn't do it until the very eve of court, eve of trial.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When their lawyers got it. When most jurors heard this fact, they're like, okay,
that's huge, because it's one thing to say cease and desist, and in defiance of the cease and desist, Alex is like, screw you, your kid's alive, you're Christ, blah, blah, blah. But that never happened. I did not know that.
Exactly. That never happened at all. It was key, critical, essential evidence that they didn't allow him to present in either trial. They didn't allow him to present all the times he's apologized, even though Texas law explicitly states, like most states, that if you apologize in any way, issue a correction or retraction in any way, you have a right to present that to the jury as mitigation of damages.
That's germane.
The judge just struck that, said you're not allowed to hear that, and pretended that he never did apologize, but he'd apologized like 25 times in the prior 4 years.
So briefly, after now, he gets an appeal in Texas, and Connecticut is just trying to figure out the damages.
So all of the cases are stayed pending the bankruptcy proceeding.
Okay.
So the Connecticut court was initially going to flagrantly violate a bankruptcy stay allow the case to proceed anyway, and then got word from the bankruptcy court, federal law still trumps. So quit pretending you can violate a stay and you're going to have a Connecticut state judge in contempt of a federal court. That's how crazy these judges are about Alex Jones. And so because of that, all the cases are stopped. The bankruptcy court may resolve it. He has a right to appeal the judgment in Texas. The problem in Connecticut is the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court are just as political and partisan as the trial court is. So extremely unlikely he could ever get justice there. The problem in Texas is the Court of Appeals, where he has a right of appeal, is equally political. 5 of the 6 judges are liberal Democratic judges. There are judges who have run for Texas Supreme Court on the grounds of screwing Alex Jones over in their Court of Appeals.
Okay.
That's how bad it is. The only hope he has is 2 courts, the Texas Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court, other than the bankruptcy court correcting a lot of these things. So the Texas Supreme Court, 7 conservative Republicans. At the very beginning of the case, at the time I was involved in the case, the 2 of the Texas Supreme Court justices wanted to take it then and stop the whole case then. He only needed 1 more, and it would have ended the whole charade. So I think the Texas Supreme Court, if they ever take up the case, will reverse all of it, because there were so many rights violated, so many rules ignored, such respect for the law thrown out, that even for Alex Jones, they've got to respect the law. And the Connecticut case's only hope is either the bankruptcy court or the U.S. Supreme Court. It does implicate U.S. Supreme Court constitutional issues, because it goes to the Hustler versus Falwell case, the Westboro Baptist case, which said there's no such thing as a wrong idea. You can't sue over an idea. They're trying to do that here. And constitutionally, there's a requirement called colloquium, which says you have to identify the person you're lying about, or it's free speech. So here, Alex Jones never named any of the plaintiffs ever. Everybody suing him, he never talked about.
Okay,
they're saying.
Sorry, go ahead. Quickly, maybe this is a stupid question. If Alex and Infowars assets are in Texas, Connecticut can still somehow get at them if there's a judgment against him?
No, they ultimately have to go to Texas as well. So to actually enforce the judgment, they have to go to Texas to enforce that judgment. They're limited to whatever assets are in Connecticut. But if there are no assets, including banking assets in Connecticut, then they got to go through Texas. And Texas law protects Alex Jones even against a Connecticut judgment.
So the other thing is, as you said, he did not, the parents who are suing, he did not single them out specifically, saying, no, everyone else's kids were killed, you guys lied. So isn't there a huge incentive for some of these other parents to sue him as well? Or has the statute of limitations passed on that?
So, the statute of limitations actually passed on every claim brought against him, because and the courts just ignored it. They just changed the rules about statutes of limitations, like they changed the rules on everything else. There's basically an Alex Jones exception to everything: First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Sixth Amendment, Seventh Amendment. But in the context of the constitutionally, the court, the U.S. Supreme Court, only back in New York Times versus Sullivan, one of the things that has not always been well remembered about that case is it wasn't just the actual malice standard for public figures. And by the way, exactly. By the way, they said that all of these people were private figures, even though they'd been all over TV voluntarily. Right. That's another issue. But in terms of the other aspect of Sullivan was, you have to identify the person either by name, by image, or they're in such a small group that you have no choice but to know it's about them.
Right.
And that usually has been no greater than 25 people. There's a lot more than that in the context of Sandy Hook. The Texas Court of Appeals just eviscerated that, said, well, we're not going to apply that standard anymore. The new Texas standard is if you say something about a public event and somebody can Google somebody's name as being possibly connected to that event, they can now sue you if they're emotionally upset. But a good point you make, most of the people connected to Sandy Hook have never sued or blamed Alex Jones for any of this. It's only a very small group connected to plaintiffs' lawyers who are making a lot of money off of blaming everybody except the shooter, everybody except the school safety, lack of school safety that was present, because truth of Sandy Hook is politicians lied, so kids died.
Yeah.
You couldn't lock the inside of the door. This is why they hid information in the FOIA request. This is why they were destroying evidence after the case that set people on all these crazy conspiracy theories, was because there actually was a cover-up of an actual illicit, in my view, criminal behavior. The school safety people had pocketed the money rather than spend it on basic school safety for kids. If teachers had the mere means of locking the inside of the door, many of the kids would have lived. And they couldn't allow that to get out. So they had to hide that. And instead, if you wanted to blame the gun, you also couldn't let out anything about the bad pharmacological care of the individual, bad mental health treatment of young men in America, inadequate school safety in general. The fact that the more a place is a gun-free zone, the more it's a crime open zone, mass shooting zone is what they should really call those, and all of that. So all of that was suppressed. Most of the people haven't sued him, but basically the bankruptcy court will probably ultimately control things. He has a hope at the Texas Supreme Court, a hope at the U.S. Supreme Court. But the only way any of these courts are going to take proper action to protect his constitutional rights, even if people hate Alex Jones, hate him about Sandy Hook, everybody should be concerned that it's exactly in these cases they make the perilous precedents that take the rest of our rights away. And if enough public outrage in the legal and political community is risen, then you're going to see the court step in and correct it. If it's not, they're going to set a perilous precedent that will be used against the rest of us.
Robert, running out of time, what has been your favorite part of this interview?
The CIA occasionally interrupting us.
God bless America.
All month long, the biggest movies are streaming free on Pluto TV's Popcorn Summer Movies. Watch star-studded blockbusters like Titanic and Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen, or fall in love with charming rom-coms like Hitch and How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. The best part? Pluto TV is 100% free. No credit cards, not even a sign-up. Plus, Pluto TV has hundreds of channels with thousands more movies, TV shows, and more. Download the Pluto TV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming now. Pluto TV. Drop in, watch free.